We are very proud. Okay.
Sorry.
It's good.
Yep.
So we are very proud of the number of participants. You are about 70 watching us from different European countries. We were honored to have Mr. Claraval, the Belgian Minister of Agriculture, among us, but due to a change in his agenda, his speech had to be recorded. As Melanie explained, given the international participants to the webinar, it will be held in English with a Zoom translation. As president of the Belgian Agricultural Journalists Associations, I have the honor to introduce today's topics. The dramatic situation for the Ukrainian population and its cascading repercussions have led to historic economic disruptions, the full consequences of which are not yet known. This situation has already given rise to a lot of economic analysis. Our objective today was to offer some additional information. We have been informed about this war through the media, so we are in a way disconnected from the reality on the field. In order to better measure the way it's experienced on a daily basis by the population, we have asked a series of actors in the field of Ukrainian agriculture to give their testimony. Given the frequent power cuts in Ukraine following the Russian bombardment, we suggested that they send us a recording of their interventions so that we would have an alternative way to listen to them if necessary, but I hope it won't be the case. So we will start by watching the speech recorded by the Minister Claraval, who will present us the Ukraine task force set up by Belgium.
Okay, 1 second here. Okay, and just to let you know, the minister spoke in French and in Dutch, and unfortunately the translation does not work in that case. So for those of you who do not speak French and Dutch, I apologize for that. We're going to do our best. Okay, here we go.
Melanie, we have any sound?
You have no sound?
No.
That's strange. I have sound. 1 second. Now?
Verantwoordelijkheden.
Does the sound work now? Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. Let's start again.
Dag iedereen. In de eerste plaats wil ik de Belgische Vereniging van Landbouwjournalisten bedanken voor de organisatie van deze webinar. Als ik jullie moet toespreken via een video, wil dat zeggen dat ik ben opgehouden door mijn ministeriële verantwoordelijkheden. Desondanks leek het mij belangrijk een stand van zaken met jullie op te maken van de werkzaamheden van de Taskforce Ukraine. De aanval op het Oekraïnse grondgebied door Russische troepen is een gebeurtenis met een bijzondere omvang voor onze regio en veroorzaakt een groot aantal problemen die de Europese burgers rechtstreeks voelen. De oorlog toont het geopolitieke belang aan van de landbouw. De blokkering van miljoenen tonnen graan in de Oekraïnse havens door de Russen enkele maanden geleden en de vernietiging van landbouwgronden tonen dat aan. De impact van dit gewapend conflict was te verwachten en daarom heb ik vanaf het begin van de Russische aanval beslist om de taskforce Oekraïne op te richten, samen met mijn collega Pierre Derman en met Eva de Bleker. Wij wilden ook de gewesten erbij betrekken. La première réunion a eu lieu le 29 mars 2022, soit moins d'un mois après le début de l'attaque russe. Cette task force se donnait pour objectif premier d'anticiper, en concertation avec la filière agroalimentaire, les conséquences économiques du conflit en Ukraine, mais aussi de définir les stratégies nécessaires et élaborer des plans d'action. La task force doit apporter des réponses aux problèmes à court et moyen terme, mais aussi des réponses proposant une vision plus stratégique à long terme. Observation, prévision, anticipation et solution sont en quelque sorte les grands axes de la naissance de cette task force. La guerre sur le territoire ukrainien, qui porte légitimement le surnom de grenier à blé de l'Europe, était destinée à produire des effets sur le secteur agroalimentaire. À cela, ajoutons encore la hausse du prix des engrais nécessaires aux cultures. Dès le début du conflit ukrainien, le SPF ECO, en collaboration avec la filière agroalimentaire, a assuré quotidiennement un monitoring de la situation dans le secteur, dont l'évolution des risques en matière d'approvisionnement. Le SPF en dresse un rapport quotidien au NCCN. Le gouvernement ainsi que les administrations ont pris toute la mesure de la situation et fait preuve d'une grande vigilance face aux difficultés engendrées par ce conflit international. Concrètement, à la suite de la première réunion, le gouvernement a pu adopter une première mesure visant à flexibiliser temporairement l'étiquetage des produits à base d'huile de tournesol. La task force a permis de répondre à la problématique de manière flexible et pragmatique. En concertation avec le SPF Santé publique, l'AFSCA, le SPF Économie, nous avons élaboré un plan d'action qui permette aux entreprises agroalimentaires de poursuivre leurs activités, tout en garantissant la sécurité des consommateurs via une information correcte, suffisante et transparente. L'exemple de l'huile de tournesol est parlant pour mieux se rendre compte des enjeux de la guerre en Ukraine sur notre secteur agroalimentaire. Le secteur agroalimentaire européen utilise l'huile de tournesol comme produit de base pour la confection de toute une frange de produits alimentaires. L'Europe serait dépendante de l'huile de tournesol à hauteur de 35 à 45%. Il se posait donc la question du risque de pénurie et du remplacement de l'huile de tournesol par d'autres huiles végétales. Les questions pratiques, telles que l'étiquetage, les obligations légales d'indiquer les ingrédients et la nécessité d'étudier les solutions pratiques et temporaires, ainsi que le besoin de flexibilité, ont été étudiés. Bien sûr, d'autres mesures sont discutées au sein de la task force. En septembre, le gouvernement a approuvé une série de mesures visant à réduire l'impact du coût de l'énergie sur base d'un plan d'action que j'ai pu développer, qui avait été lui-même élaboré sur la base des travaux de la task force Ukraine. Sur les 25 mesures que j'avais déposées sur la table du Cairn, 13 ont été adoptées pour aider tant les ménages que les entreprises à traverser cette crise. C'est dans ce paquet de 25 mesures que se trouve une décision qui me tenait particulièrement à cœur et que j'avais adressée dès le début de la crise à ma collègue ministre de l'Énergie, celle d'assurer la priorité énergétique au secteur agroalimentaire en cas d'interruption de l'approvisionnement. Dans les mois à venir, je continuerai de suivre attentivement l'évolution de la situation. Pour conclure, il faut aussi détailler le travail qui est réalisé au niveau européen. Sur le plan agricole, les stratégies mises en place ne permettent pas de faire face à des chocs d'une ampleur telle que nous la connaissons. La Belgique, comme d'autres États membres de l'Union européenne, s'interroge sur la façon dont la Commission européenne va tenir compte de la nouvelle situation géopolitique dans les plans stratégiques de la PAC. Il y a une réelle prise de conscience des risques qui pèsent sur la sauvegarde de la sécurité alimentaire et la résilience des systèmes alimentaires au niveau européen. Au Conseil de l'Union européenne, des discussions portent ainsi sur les stratégies à mettre en place. C'est le cas, par exemple, de la stratégie de la ferme à la fourchette, et qui prévoit notamment des diminutions de pourcentage d'utilisation des pesticides, d'antibiotiques ou encore d'intrants azotés. Une étude de cette stratégie menée par le Centre commun de recherche de la Commission européenne conclut que cette stratégie conduit malheureusement à des baisses de production allant jusqu'à 15%, mais aussi à une augmentation des importations et surtout un renchérissement des coûts de l'alimentation. Il faut donc oser mener une réflexion sur cette stratégie et l'améliorer là où cela s'avère nécessaire. Lors des discussions européennes, la Belgique adopte une vision pragmatique qui veille au renforcement de notre souveraineté alimentaire. Vous comprendrez donc que les enjeux de cette crise vont bien au-delà des frontières, mais aussi des conflits ponctuels. Les événements géopolitiques dramatiques ont des conséquences directes, mais sont aussi le reflet de faiblesses plus larges qui peuvent se trouver au sein de notre système. Je continue de garder un œil attentif à la situation au travers de la task force, mais aussi par un travail actif au sein du gouvernement, pour venir en aide à tous les acteurs de la chaîne alimentaire qui se voient impactés par cette problématique, qui aura eu, je l'espère, au moins le mérite d'ouvrir les yeux de l'Europe sur l'importance du secteur agroalimentaire pour notre équilibre sociétal. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous remercie pour votre attention et serai ravi de pouvoir répondre à vos questions en différé par le biais des organisateurs. Merci pour votre attention.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Sorry, it's a little complicated because once I'm recording, I can't minimize my screen, which is a little frustrating. And so next up we have Yuri Mikhailov. We are pleased to welcome Yuri today. Yuri has made extra special efforts to be here. He did not have energy where he was today, and so he has gone to the mall, I believe. Yuri has decades of experience working as a columnist, as a deputy editor and chief editor of leading agricultural magazines in Ukraine. He retired in 2015, but he continues to write for various agricultural publications as a freelancer. Yuri served as president of the Union of Agricultural Journalists of Ukraine from 2008 to 2018, and he is now the honorary president of the organization. Welcome, Yuri. Yuri, I'm just going to put your slides up. I'm just going to move those here. Okay, we are ready for you. I can't hear you.
After the withdrawal of Russian troops from the occupied territories, most farms and enterprises turned out to be looted. What Russians could not take out and still they destroyed. The production of agricultural products in Ukraine decreased due to losses on the occupied territories and zones of active military operation. The income of the population has decreased due to the closure of many businesses, and therefore there is a reason this balance between the supply of products and a fall in the demand. Large producers cannot try to solve this issue by increasing exports, while small and medium-sized enterprises are in tough conditions in Ukraine, since they cannot easily turn to export and or raise prices. Also, small and medium-sized producers have very limited access to product sales channels, such as large supermarket chains. Starting October, Russians began constant and massive missile attacks on a critical civilian infrastructure. Since October 10, Russians have fired more than 1,000 missiles and drones at power facilities. 50% of Ukrainians' critically important power infrastructure has been damaged. Emergency and scheduled power outages directly affect the whole Ukrainian economy in general, and agriculture and food industry in particular. The latter includes production, processing, food storage facilities, cafes and restaurants, grocery stores, and supermarkets, especially departments of frozen food like seafood and or semi-finished foodstuffs. In rural areas, animal farms may be cut off from electricity for several days or even weeks. In some large Ukrainian cities, due to shelling, air raids, alarms, and power outages, grocery stores and supermarkets do not work for 8 to 12 hours, which reduces the sale of goods, first of all, the foodstuffs. There is also a typical catch-22. During the blackouts, many grocery stores and supermarkets operate cash only. At the same time, it's not possible to withdraw cash from the ATMs for the same reason, namely the electricity outage. Also, power outages may lead to the loss of internet and mobile communications that further complicates the business operations, especially in rural areas. The increase in the price of electricity for industrial consumers means the increase of logistics costs. In order to ensure the normal production process, businesses are forced to buy power generators that run on diesel and gasoline. The cost of kilowatt of electricity obtained from diesel generator is up to 3 times higher than that from the grid. But both producers and processors are forced to bear such costs, since a long-term power outages lead to even greater production losses and higher production costs. Many agricultural producers complain about the low prices, which often are lower than the cost of production. There are also problems due to shutdown of most Ukrainian seaports and the increase in logistic costs. According to the World Bank estimate, the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine will cost about 500 to 600 billion euros. Before the attacks on civilian infrastructure, the World Bank predicted a drop in Ukraine's GDP in 2022 by 35%, but now this indicator may be 40%. The estimated losses of Ukrainian agribusiness due to invasion of Russia is about 50 billion euros. Indirect losses take into account foregone income from reduced production and lower domestic prices, as well as additional costs that producers are forced to bear because of the war. The specified amount covers losses due to disruptions in logistics and a decrease in prices for export-oriented goods, reduction in the production of agricultural crops, decrease in the production of animal husbandry products, increase in production costs, and reduction in the production of perennial crops. The invaders stole from the occupied territories of Ukraine about 6 million tons of grain. the value of the stolen food is about 1 billion euros. 50% of livestock farms and 10% of cows were destroyed. Almost 20% of the cattle were concentrated on territories that are currently occupied or where active hostilities are taking place. In the first months of the war, it was possible to partially relocate livestock and enterprises, but this was possible only on a small scale. For several months, processors have been faced with the refusals of pre-ordered chilled meat, postponement of deliveries, and forced revision of schedules for production and or shipment of finished products. Thus, many operators have significant transitional stocks of products and slumped income. So in response, processors reduced procurement volumes and a workload of slaughterhouses by at least 20 to 30%. Between mid-October and mid-November, the average price of live pigs dropped about 20%. In March, as a result of Russian armed aggression and massive shelling, one of the largest and most modern poultry farms near Kherson was cut off of power. Because of the occupation, the farm did not have the opportunity to feed the birds and maintain a sanitary regime, as a result of which the vast majority of chickens died. Before the full-scale invasion began, the facility had more than 4 million chickens. For 9 months of 2022, the total number of poultry decreased by 14% or 16 million heads. At the same time, by the end of 9 months of 2022, the number of laying hens decreased by 6.3 million. In 9 months of 2022, the production of meat of all types of poultry decreased by 7.5% or 73,000 tons. In the overall structure of meat production, the share of poultry products accounts for 56%. In the structure of poultry meat itself, 94% is broiler meat, 2.5% turkey meat, and the production of duck and goose meat has dropped to almost zero. In 2022, egg production has decreased by 800 million eggs, or 16%. This year, many poultry farms remained on the territories occupied by Russia, primarily in the Kharkiv, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. One of the problems is that the poultry market in Ukraine is highly monopolized. Thus, Mironivsky Hliboprodukt, which is the largest producer of poultry meat in Ukraine, monopolized the poultry meat market with a share of 68%. The egg market is practically divided between 3 companies. A total of 3 million hectares of forests have already been affected in Ukraine, which is almost a third of the forests of our state. And some of them are lost forever. During the 8 months of the war, the damage to the environment of Ukraine from the aggression of Russia is estimated at more than 37 billion euros. According to the World Wildlife Fund, already 20% of nature conservation areas of Ukraine have suffered from the war. 8 nature reserves and 10 natural parks remain under occupation. Dangerous substances enter the air every day due to forest fires, the burning of petroleum products, and the burning of industrial facilities. Since the beginning of the war, the volume of such emissions has exceeded 67 million tons. For comparison, in 2021 and 2020, they amounted to only 2.2 million tons per year. Mined territories. Since 2014, 180,000 square kilometers have been affected, which is 30% of the entire territory of Ukraine, or is the size of 2 territories of Austria. It will take about 10 years to completely demine and clear the territory. According to preliminary estimates, the total cost of the demining will be about 2 billion euros. In particular, agricultural lands are contaminated with improvised ammunition, cluster shells, anti-personnel mines, and anti-tank mines. According to the State Agency of Water Resources of Ukraine, military actions in Ukraine significantly aggravate the problems of sustainable management of water resources. During the 8 months of the war, more than 500 water infrastructure facilities were destroyed, and the volume of water lost due to damage and destruction of dams and other hydrotechnical structures is 742.2 million cubic meters. About harvest, according to the forecast of the Ministry of Agriculture, this year's harvest was supposed to be 65-67 million tons of grain and oil crops. According to the latest reports, a sort of areas under corn may remain in the fields. Because of the prolonged rain season, the moisture content of corn is 30% and higher, while the high prices on natural gas makes it unprofitable to dry wet corn. Since January, Ukraine has exported 52 million tons of agricultural and food products for amount of 22 billion euros. In volumes, it is 16.7%, and in value, 13.7% less than during the same period of last year. The main export commodities were corn, wheat, rapeseed, sunflower oil, oilseed meal, barley, and soybean. From February 24 to August 1st, the export of all Ukrainian commodities and goods by sea stopped. The export agriculture included was possible only by railways and roads. Also, a significant amount of export was by barges from Ukrainian ports on the Danube River to the nearby Romania port of Constanta. According to the data of the European Commission regarding the trade in dairy products, for the 3 quarters of the current year in 2022, Ukraine is the #1 supplier of butter and cheese to the European Union. Thus, according to the results of 9 months, Ukraine exported 4.3 thousand tons of butter to the European Union. Our problems. On November 19, the so-called grain initiative signed by Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations, according to which Ukraine could export grain and oil crops, was supposed to expire. Until recently, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, threatened not to prolong this initiative. However, on November 17, the agreement was extended for another 120 days. But on the very same day, like at the very beginning of the grain initiative, Russia shelled the territory of Ukraine, including Odessa, from which the main grain export takes place. In addition, until now, Russia has been hampering the implementation of the agreement, inhibiting the movement of ships in every possible way, including delaying inspections of ships for the presence of weapons or other cargo not provided for the agreement. Also, regular shelling of power facilities on the territory of Ukraine, primarily power generating and distribution facilities, transformers and power lines, led to a shortage of electricity throughout the country. According to government statements, about half of Ukrainian power infrastructure, primarily power distribution facilities, was damaged by Russian missile attacks, as a result of which all over the territory of Ukraine blackouts are introduced, or consumers are significantly limited in electricity consumption, which, depending on the region, can last from several hours to several days to balance the energy system. In addition, during shelling, Ukrainian enterprises and transport stopped and personnel hide in shelters. Due to this, the processing of grain cargo in the ports is significantly slowed down. Also, on December 10, Odessa was attacked by Iranian-made drones that had damaged the region's power infrastructure. For about 2 days, the entire Odessa region was in full blackout. 2023 forecast. Let's hope for the best, but remember that man proposes, God disposes. Anyway, one must keep in mind the very important thing. The uncertainty in Ukrainian everyday life is dominant. How long war will last, what Russians will strike next, how serious it will be, especially for the infrastructure, including power generation and distribution, damages to roads and bridges, how cold next winter will be, and so on. Anyway, the Minister of the Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine, Mykola Solsky, said that in 2023, Ukrainian farmers will sow up to 30% less winter crops compared to last year. Also, because of poorer financial results, producers will use less inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, and quality seeds next year. This means less harvest. But considering the decreased population, first of all, because several million people fled abroad, had decreased livestock, the export of grain and oilseeds next year may be within 45 million tons. Thank you very much. Should there be any questions, I will try to answer them.
Yuri, we were unable to follow with the slides. It seemed that the slides didn't match what you were saying, so I just wanted to let you speak. Do we have your permission to send out the slides to anyone who's interested following the webinar?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Let's just see if there's any questions. If you have questions, please post them in the chat box. I'll just give it a minute in case someone's typing, or raise your hand and maybe we can do it the old-fashioned way. Yuri, I'm curious, what's the situation like as a reporter for you working?
You mean journalist?
Yeah, as a journalist, are you able to get around and do your job? Is it difficult or?
Yeah, I see. We have a lot of problems with journalism in Ukraine. First of all, a big number of media closed because of the aggression, especially if they were on the occupied territories. A big number of journalists, especially female journalists, fled with their children to West Ukraine, and many of them even to abroad. So we lost a big number of journalists. Some of the journalists were conscripted to the Ukrainian army. Another problem is that because of the war, because of the decreased income of the advertisers, the advertisers began to reconsider their budgets, and so the money for advertisement decreased. Because of this, many media stopped printing versions of their editions and went only on internet. So the situation is not favorable for Ukrainian journalism.
Well, let's hope it improves in the short term. Looks like we have two questions. There's one from Jeremy Vandergaard. He asks, what are the consequences for the supply of agricultural machinery for the farmer?
It's very difficult to answer what will be the consequences, because, as you know, the hostilities are continuing. The farmers, because of the low prices on their commodities, do not have much money. So if some machinery manufacturers want to sell their machinery or even spare parts, they must consider possibly some kind of credit for their consumers.
Which is difficult, I imagine, at this moment. Okay, we have a question from Kevin Claire. I'm just going to ask him to, oh, he's unmuted, so he can ask the question himself.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Kevin Claire, French journalist working in Paris for an economical newspaper on grain markets. I have a question, a precise question. Maybe you don't have the answer. I think we told with traders that there is a high probability of lower seeding of corn and sunflower for next year in March and April. Do you have any numbers or any estimation to give about the possibility of lower surface in sunflower and corn, please, or is it too precise?
Again, it's very difficult to answer because about 30% of corn will remain in the fields. 30% of winter wheat will not be sown. So what to do in spring? Will these areas that were not sown will be sown with something else. Probably yes, there may be more areas with sunflower, maybe with rapeseed. But again, these crops are export crops. And so without the solving the logistics, there again may be problems, because what to do with the sunflower meal, for example? The export of sunflower meal dropped, and producers do not know how to deal with this. So I cannot answer this this question. Probably the estimates are that next year there will be about 15 million tons of wheat, and maybe 30 to 40 million tons of corn, something like that.
Okay. We have a few more questions here.
Thanks.
There's a comment here from Frederic. Frederic, would you like to unmute and ask a question? Frederic, would you like to comment? If so, you have to unmute. And if not, we'll move on to the next question. Okay, I've got a question here from Christophe Soulard. Christophe, do you want to unmute and ask the question? Okay, he says, yeah, it doesn't have a microphone. So his question is about finance for farmers and how banks can finance Ukrainian agriculture.
Ukrainian government launched a program for facilitating crediting farmers in the spring. Some farmers use this crediting program, some are not. But crediting the agriculture always was a big problem in Ukraine. The big companies that till thousands and even hundreds of thousands of land have a big chance to obtain credit, especially from foreign creditors. But Ukrainian banks themselves are now in a poor situation because of the war. So it's very hard to say how crediting next season will be. Maybe situation will be clarified closer to the spring, not now.
Okay. There's a hand up here from Alexandra. I hope I said that correctly. If you'd like to, yeah, ask your question.
Hello, I call you from Romania, from the farm. And I wish to ask Mr. Mihailov to say us, it is evaluation of destruction of agricultural machineries, how many and as percent of the agricultural power from Ukrainian farmers, and two, on the land, how much land cannot in next year use it?
Oh, very difficult question. You can consider the territories that are now occupied by Russians probably will not be tilled next. A lot of areas are not demined, and it's very dangerous. Maybe you see the picture of a tractor that run on mine, and this accident continues. So it will be the decision of farmers to work on demined lands or not. So some areas certainly will be sown, will be tilled, but one must keep in mind that the most fertile areas of Ukraine are in the south regions where farmers produce grains, produce oil crops, and also vegetables and fruits. The central Ukraine is fertile also, but the territories that are most safe now are in western Ukraine that are not very fertile. And I mean, soil is not very fertile there. Considering the machinery, a lot of machinery had been stolen by Russians. Ukrainian farmers will certainly need spare parts. Some machinery were destroyed in the companies. So I can give you exact numbers. The war continues, and maybe the exact numbers will be given later when the hostilities will end.
Okay. We have one more question here. It's from Luc Survey. He wants to know if the Russians requisition foodstuffs, as was the case in Europe during the Second World War.
Certainly, yes. As I mentioned, Russians stole about 6 million tons of grain. They stole machinery from occupied territories. They continue to steal, for example, medical equipment. Everything they can steal, they steal. Everything they can steal, they destroy. They destroyed because of the poor supply of food for a Russian army. They began to kill pigs, cows of farmers without any payments. So it is a big scale of stealing there. So again, the war continues. It's very difficult to say the exact numbers because for last week, the line of hostilities was stabilized, but it can move any moment in any direction. Russians may again launch an attack, or Ukrainian army may launch an attack. So it's and the shelling of Ukrainian territory continues with missiles, with drones, and so on. So the damages and losses are accumulating.
Okay, we have one last question before we move on to Tom. So we'll try to make it quick to stay on schedule. Do you know how many, sorry, the question comes from Kevin Clare again. Do you know how many crush facilities of rape and sunflower are still operating in Ukraine? How many oil and meal, or do they actually produce? And do you have estimates for 2023 and 2024?
As far as I know, as I remember, the export of sunflower oil, this is the main vegetable oil that is produced, is about 5.5 million tons. The harvest of oil crops of sunflower was about maybe 10.5 million tons. Some about 3 million tons of rapeseed, and about 1.5 million tons of, or 2 million tons of soybeans. So the prospects for 2023 will depend on the how war will continue. Decisions about what to replace with what to replace areas that were not sown with winter wheat, for example. Will it be sown with say spring wheat or corn or sunflower, for example? So the situation will be clarified closer to the spring campaign.
Okay. Yuri, thank you so much for your time today and for making extra special efforts to make sure you could be here live. It's much better live than having a video. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Preet,
Yes.
Preet, if you'd like to introduce Tom.
Yes, hello everybody. I will introduce our very first testimony. It will come from Tom van Goey. Tom is a Belgian who runs a farm in Ukraine. It's south of Kiev. And he also runs a grain trade company, Grainex in Ukraine. So he exports grains from the land to the rest of the world. And together with his Ukrainian wife, he had set up the aid organization Flanders for Ukraine. So he collects goods from here in our country to transport it to Ukraine. But Tom, I think you can explain it better than me.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. First of all, my wife is not from Ukraine, my wife is from Russia. But it makes it very interesting because we have the company in Ukraine for 20 years now. We cultivate 3,000 hectares of land. I will briefly show you a video because I will share my screen. It will make it more clear to everybody, I think, how it is to work in Ukraine. Over the last 20 years, let's say, of those 20 years, I'm 15 years active myself in Ukraine. Let me start with sharing my screen and then we'll take it from there.
Tom, I think you just have to make sure you keep the volume down so that the translation still works.
Okay, of the video.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I've not done it before, but we do it like this. Nope, that's not it. Close this.
Tom, you have to open up the video behind your screen. So
Yeah.
lower this one, open the video up, and then when you
Okay.
share screen, it will appear.
Share
As an
screen,
option.
and then it says,
It should show you the open screen behind, if that makes sense.
oh, are you seeing my screen already?
No.
Oh, whiteboards.
So lower the Zoom screen, open up your video without pressing play, and then open up Zoom again, and then share screen, and the option of whatever's open behind Zoom should show up there. Does that make sense?
I'll try this, share.
If not, I have your other one. There you go. Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Now I'm on
So-
Google Earth, it seems, yeah.
Okay, so you just want, if you want your video to work, you have to have just the video open behind, nothing else.
Okay,
So it chooses that screen specifically.
do you
So
now
close-
see the video?
No, you have to close this one. If you want, I can load up the other one.
Oh, those 12%. Yeah, maybe you do it, Melanie.
Okay, so could you just stop sharing screen and then I will, yeah, perfect. Just give me 1 second, sorry about that.
We're learning.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. And share screen. Okay, there you go.
Okay, yeah. So what you see now is a video, a compilation of drone images we made over the last years. But I'll ask you from time to time, Melanie, to drag forward through it because it will be a little bit too long to fit in,
Yeah.
in the minutes.
No
you
problem.
can speed it up a little bit and I'll tell you where to stop. That's why I
Okay.
wanted to do it myself. But yeah.
I know.
So yeah, these are the large fields everybody knows in the Ukraine. As you go on a little bit further, Yeah, it's really sad. I cannot do it myself because I would know what to tell when I see something. These are our potatoes. So we have, yeah, like I said, we have 3,000 hectares of land which we cultivate, of which 120 hectares of potatoes, which we grow for the last 12 years. We try to do something. We do not have animals, so we try to do something extra, because only the cultivation of cash crops, as you see many times, the big agro holdings in Ukraine, they only grow sunflower and corn, and then and soybean maybe, but and then they have some sort of side projects to show to the people that they invest. So if you drag it along a little bit further, then I'll just see what we have there. Yeah, this is the irrigation we have. This is some of the machinery. So this is all part of the work we do on the land. So if you drag it on a little bit further, Melanie. Yeah, further.
Sorry.
Soybean. Yeah, these potatoes. Yeah, this is the building part where we are building a storage, which was very, very difficult to do back in 2017. So that's already a long time ago, let's say. We invested in Ukraine about 12 million euros as from the moment when I arrived, let's say. Before the investments were rather small or smaller. But as from the moment I arrived, we invested in 400 hectares of irrigation for the potatoes, and also in 7,000 tons storage for potato, and 13,000 tons of grain storage in the building you see behind the construction, which is going on now. So you can jump another half a minute or something. Some of the storage is in crates. Some of the storage, as you see, is in bulk. This is all the potato storage. Yeah. Now you can drag it on. This is the processing of the potato. It changed a little bit. We increased the building. So yeah, fast forward. Yeah, this will come back during. This is the irrigation we created. So we have 15 pumps, wells. We are not so far away located. I would have shown you very clearly on my own screen, but I cannot. We are about 120 kilometers from the Borispol airport. If you go to the southeast of the Dnieper River, the big, that's what they call the Mississippi of Ukraine. One of the big agro holding companies, Nibulon, was very active on the Dnieper with barges. Very, very good investment, which they did. I think Nibulon has about 26 elevators in Ukraine. Sadly, I think it was on the 22nd of July. The owner, Vadatursky, got killed in an attack with a rocket, which was clearly aimed at his house. So he and his wife died in the night by a rocket which was aimed at their bedroom, let's say. So what we see here is also problems which we had back in 2017 when our competitors. Another thing I would have liked to show you on the screen, to understand how agriculture works in Ukraine, you have to know that when the land was privatized, so when we went from communism to democracy, let's say, in Ukraine in 1991, the process started of dividing the land between all of the former workers. So we had a kolkhoz where were more than 600 people employed. So all of these people and some of the people who worked before got a parcel of land, which is in our main village, 2.40, on average 2.42 hectares. So we rent the land from we are working now in 5 villages. I started with 1,600 hectares. Now we are at 3,000. We should go to 3,600 after New Year's. But maybe you can stop it now, Melanie, so I can explain a little bit better. Yeah, stop the movie. So what you see here between no.
You want me to continue sharing?
Okay. I meant this one. Yeah. So what I was telling of the parcels, what we see here on the movie is a 170 hectare field between the white poles. If you see it, I hope you see it. It's one of those parcels, which is 2.4 hectares, which is rented by another competitor of ours. So what happened? We were gaining land. Like I told you, we went from 1,600 to hopefully 3,600. We added 2,000 hectares in the last 5 years. We had a swapping system. So our competitors, well, they were fine up till a couple of years ago with swapping. When we were growing, we were redrawing a little bit the fields between each other. But in 2017, they put a halt to this and they sabotaged our irrigation project by putting poles in the field. So what you see on the movie, you can see it not very clearly, but behind those poles, you have the irrigation boom, which is 475 meters wide. It could not irrigate the part of the field we see now, which is about 40 hectares. So what I'm willing to say is that it's a big adventure to work in Ukraine. I love the country and the people very much, but a lot of the business is done, let's say, in a sort of a Russian style, as we see it now in the war. So there are a lot of issues to attack, especially as from last year in July 2021. The land market was freed up because before the Ukrainians could not sell their parcels of land. There are over 10 million Ukrainians which got a parcel of land. So as from 1.5 years, it's possible to sell these parcels, which to me from time to time could be even related to the situation we currently see in Ukraine, but maybe that's my fantasy. Because yeah, like I told, the people having got vouchers, this is a very well known in Russian too, word in Russian or Ukrainian. That was things that happened after the independence. So people working on the land, on the kolkhozes, they got a parcel of land. People working in the factories, they got a share in the factory. These shares were bought by the oligarchs, but the last thing which is still not divided between the oligarchs is the land. So in Russia, I'm not a specialist on Russia. I know there are also huge agro holdings in Russia, 500,000 hectares up to 1 million hectares. They bought a lot of land from these landowners. Millions of Russians sold their land to them. Of course, probably still a lot of people are renting out their land, and it's not all big agro industry in even not in Russia. I think. Oh, we're 5 minutes over. I see. So Melanie, I have to stop.
If you want to wrap it up with any comments, just to keep on schedule.
So yeah, what was I saying? What other issues which I would like to is that logistics is very, very difficult these days. We were used to ship our goods 20, 30 kilometers to the next elevator. Now we bought an extra 4 trucks to move everything towards Odessa port and Reni port on the Danube River. So this goes a lot slower than we are used to. But let's say the panic is gone. The situation has stabilized in a way. So we are able now to sell and to move our grains, which was until, let's say, summertime, very, very difficult. We still had corn, last year's corn back in summer. So, but due to techniques we used, we invested in ventilation, and in this way we can now store maybe up to 50-70% more than we could before. We can just pile up the grain higher, up to 7-8 meters high. So in that regard, everything's better too. But that's maybe just, if there are questions, let's start with that.
I was just going to comment here. There is a question from someone, but I believe that we're going to do the questions for all 4 of the next speakers at the very end. And then what we'll ask is people to pose those questions, but first put the name of the person to whom you want that question to be asked, if that's okay. So we'll keep the presentations moving on, and then we'll do the questions.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Our next speaker is Joris van Veen. He's a grain trader at Van de Venne Commodities for already 10 years. And he's also board member of VEGRA. It's the Belgian Grain Trade Federation. So he's perfectly placed to tell us how the war in Ukraine is affecting the grain trade in our country and the rest of Europe. Joris, I give you the floor.
Hi everybody, hope the micro works. Let's try to share it.
It's working.
Is it working?
Yes.
Yes, it's working.
Okay, good. So I'm asked to tell something about the impact of the Ukrainian war on European grain trade and a bit on the world grain trade. So I'll start with the direct impact of the Ukrainian war on February and March, the alternative export routes that the market was trying to find, eventually the grain corridor, the total effect on the EU trade flows, the future for Ukrainian crops, but also for the Black Sea wheat exports, and some conclusions. If you see what happened before the war, so these are slides from February. What was the part of the Black Sea on the global wheat trade? You see that from the Black
Joris,
Sea, yeah.
Sorry to stop you. We can't see your slides.
Ah, okay. But the screen is shared, no?
If it is, I can't see it. No one else yet. We've got comments here that they cannot see it.
Okay. You see that?
Yes,
see them now?
There you go. Yep, perfect. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
It'll be very hard without the slides, I think.
Yeah. You just probably need to press play for them. Okay.
So here you go. So I said, you see here the impact of what the market share is from Russia and Ukraine before the war. So Russia and Ukraine were responsible for 28% of the global wheat trade, where the main part was for Russia, but also an important part coming from Ukraine. And if you look at the global corn trade, it's almost 20%, where Ukraine is really important, especially for the European market, but also for the world market, like China. As said before, we also see on the rapeseed trade and also on the veg oil trade that both countries are really important, and most part of it is also from Ukraine. On the presentation, I will focus really on the wheat and the corn, because yeah, we my main focus is on grain trade. So that's the most thing I can tell about that. If you look at what was still in the bins at the start of the war, so at mid-February, the world was still expecting for Ukraine to export 5.5 million tons of wheat and almost 40 million tons of corn. Then the war started, so for the world balance, that was agriculture goods that were blocked in Ukraine and that was already sold or already planned to ship, or market was counting on that. You see that as well in the expectations that there was published in February 22 as well, that the importance of Black Sea wheat export was quite important for March, April still. People are expecting around 5 million tons of export coming from Black Sea, and that's wheat only. If you look at corn in the Northern Hemisphere, you see as well that coming from Ukraine, the market was still counting on, around 3 to 4 million tons of corn coming from Ukraine for March, April, May. There was still 30-40 million tons to sell, so the market was really counting on that coming. And you see that for the market, we have also big corn producers in the Southern Hemisphere, but Argentina and Brazil, normally they don't export on February, March, April. We really rely on in that period of time, we really rely on Ukrainian and American exports. So quite important at the timing of the war as well for the international grain trade. The problem of the war was that every port that's used for the export, and there are really big important ports for the grain export in Ukraine. You have Odessa, Pivdeny or Yuzhny, Mykolaiv, Ochakov, Chornomorsk, really important for the trade flows. But all the ports were blocked during the start of the war. Blocked by military ships of Russia that was impossible to pass with ships as well. So there were 3 small ports working that were already mentioned by Tom. That's on Rini, Izmail, Yust, Donetsk, that are ports on the Donop River that you can use to do supply, to load some small coasters, around 3, 4, 5,000 tonners, or to ship into Romania, into Constanța, and then do big shipments. But it's quite complicated, and it's not possible to do the volumes that you are normally doing from the Black Sea ports. So if you look at Europe, which is a big corn importer, there was really, for Europe, a real problem that the shipments were stopped and that you had in your corn supply a really lack of corn coming into Europe. And that's not that they didn't bought it, it's just it was not coming. And trade flows were not able to react immediately because, yes, shipments coming from Brazil taking more time, and there was no corn available as well. And then you have the heavy market reaction that you see in prices. We are now looking at Matif wheat, Euronext wheat, milling wheat, where we see prices that we have never seen before, 450 euros on Matif. There was a real panic reaction on the market because the market was not able to fill up the gap that was in the supply chain. It's not that the grains were not available, but it was just a lack in supply chain in 8 weeks that you could not fill up immediately. After the war started, immediately, almost in March, April, the market was looking to look for alternatives to ship anyway, to get grains out of the country. Also, there was a need of money also for the farmers. So there was need to export the goods anyway, because wheat was on the field. So they needed room for grain storage as well for the new harvest. And they tried to export by European borders, but that was really hard. If you look at all the supply chain problems that you have and the bottlenecks, there was capacity internally on trains, small ships or trucks, but the bottlenecks was really on the border, but you have to check all the lineups that you had on the trucks. It was taking too much time, and it was really a trade flow that existed already before the war, but it was not used to get such a volume at once. So if you look at what the market was able to do during that period in April, May, June, if you look at the grain and oilseeds exports, they were really slow. There was corn coming out of the country, but if you're looking in March, yeah, it was nearly nothing. And getting a bit better in May, and you see that later on it was getting better and better, but still not, yeah, close to 3-4 million tons the market was counting on. And then we had suddenly the grain corridor, so the agreement between Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish, and the United Nations. But that was only for 3 ports. It's for Yuzhny or Uvdeny, Odessa, and Chornomorsk. It was for 100 days starting from August 1st. But you see that it was already helping a lot in August, but for sure in September, you see that volume was pumped up and that the market was absorbing the volume that was coming from the 3 ports. You see as well in volume that at that time you're getting to 2 million tons of corn, 2 million tons of wheat almost getting out of the country. So exports were not at the level that we are used to from Ukraine, but it was helping a lot to get goods out of the country and to make room for the new crop, but also to help the world to supply grains. The big problem with the corridor was, yeah, still the inspections were taking a lot of time. You see that the lineups that were at a certain time in the outbound control, there was for 2.5 million tons of goods waiting for inspection. And then suddenly Putin on the, I think it was in the weekend of 30 October said, yeah, we want to stop the inspection, and Russians don't participate in the inspection. And you see what happened then suddenly. 70 ships were checked in 2 days without the Russians. It was really fast. And that was not really the goal from the Russians, that it was making the corridor easier than it was. So after 2 days, they really made a turnaround, said, yeah, but we will participate again because it was going too fast for them. It was too easy to export at that time. And in the middle of November, they said, okay, we want to prolong the corridor. We're very happy with that because flows are still coming now out of Russia, but it's still with 4 or 5 vessels a day, some 6, 7 vessels a day, but lineups are a bit easier, but still really difficult. To give you an example, we have a vessel, for example, that was in the inbound control the 18th of October, and that's now still in the outbound control. So normally we have, yeah, you need 2 weeks to pass the Bosporus and to load and to go back to the Bosporus and to the destinations. Today it's taking 6, 7, 8 weeks. So the cost for the logistics are enormous. That's also, as Tom said, that prices for the Ukrainian farmer are really low because there are a lot of logistical costs, not only in Ukraine, but also in the shipments. There are a lot of logistical costs on waiting times and assurance risks. Another problem already mentioned are, of course, the attacks on the energy facilities. It's good to have a corridor, but also you need to be able to load ships. And for example, in Odessa, I said 2 days, 3 days without any energy. There are generators, but it's not helping logistics at all. And one criticism that you have on the corridor, and Russia is using that as well, that a big volume coming through the corridor is just going to high-income developed countries like Europe. And that's what Putin uses to say, okay, the corridor, we have to close the corridor because it's not helping the developing countries. And if you look at what's happening in the corridor, yeah, you can't deny that almost 50% of the grains are going to Europe. And that it's helping Europe a lot in its grain balances. You see as well in all the corn imports, it's mainly corn coming to the corridor for Europe. For example, the import figures of Interstat, so they are not available for October and November yet, but I think they are quite in line with what we see here. So around more than 1 million ton of corn coming into Europe and almost 400,000 ton of wheat. But of course, if you look at the European situation, we have first to take a look at the harvest of Europe, and Europe had a harvest that was quite bad. We had in Europe, we had a crop that was 23 million tons less than the year before. And it was mainly due to dryness and heat that we had in the corn crop. So we lost a lot of corn as well in production. And on consumption is also a bit lower due to high prices on energy. So some crushers are not working, and also wheat prices are not as good. So we see a bit less of consumption, but still it's not compensating the lower production. So Europe needs to import feed grains, and we need the feed grains or to be able to export the food grains. If you look at Europe, it's quite important exporter of grains, of course, and especially for milling wheat. If Europe was not able to import all the Ukrainian corn, then for sure, yeah, Europe would use the wheat that we produce to feed the cattle, to use it in feed grains and not to export it to other countries. And if you look to the export of Europe for this season, you see that we have a record rhythm in exports, thanks to the Ukrainian imports that we have in feed grains. We are able to export food grains to the rest of the world. And a lot of the grains are going to developing countries, or like the United Nations has classed them as lower middle income developing countries. So the corridor is important for the world food supply, and not only directly for the developing countries, but for sure via imports of feed grains into Europe, we are able to export food grains to the rest of the world. So we are really convinced that corridor and smooth logistics are really important for the market, functioning of the market. If you look at how the market is looking, what we need from wheat exports from the Black Sea for the coming months, you see that the importance of the Black Sea and Europe, the market is still relying on that. So the market is still calculating on smooth logistics, not only from Ukraine, but also from Russia, and exports from Europe. And you see that the market is after the high prices, these are the FOB prices worldwide of milling wheat. The prices came down a lot. Russian wheat is still the most cheapest wheat that we see in the world, but also European wheat is helping a lot to feed the world. And of course, Russia has a really good crop this year and are able to export a lot of volume. The coming months will be a bit less due to logistics, but the world needs Black Sea grains to be able to feed it. And you see that prices, this is again wheat prices in Europe, prices came down since that the corridor is functioning, and people have more confidence that we're still really high. Historically, we are on the high side of prices, but it's not, we are lost already 150 euros if you compare it with the peak that we had in April, May, June. If you look at Chicago wheat, it's even, there we see that we are even at lower prices than before the war. And that's mainly due to the US dollar and slower export demand that we see in the US. So world prices are trading more or less back to pre-war levels, thanks to the grain corridor and all the effects that we see. What about the future Ukraine crops? It's difficult, like I already said, you can't estimate what they will plant next year because you don't know what will happen during winter. But we know that this crop already, the corn crop, has difficulties to be harvested. They're harvesting delays because there's a lack of energy to dry the crop. It's difficult to harvest the crop. So yeah, almost 30% will be harvested during or after winter, and it will have some impacts on quality, mycotoxin levels, and on the volume that we see there. And also for the expectation for next year, market is talking about 16 to 80 million tons of corn crop. In a normal year, you can see that it's 30 million tons crop. So yeah, still low estimations for next year as well, which is quite normal. If you look at where the wheat areas are, you see the conflict area, we know it all, that's more on the Russian border, and there's still a lot of wheat growing in this area as well. So for wheat plantings production, it's even more complicated than for the corn production that's more on the other side of the country. So really hard for local farmers to do their work and to feed the world as well. If we going into conclusion, yeah, we can say that the world needs export from the Black Sea. Ukraine and Russian grains. So the world has all interest that it all ends as fast as possible. The grain corridor is crucial for a good wheat export, also out of Europe. And on the long term, the impact of the Ukraine acreage, but also world energy prices and world fertilizer prices will still be a threat for world food supply chain, and especially for wheat crop, not only in Ukraine, but also due to high fertilizer prices, also for the rest of the world. So yeah, it's quite an impact on not only Europe, but on the world wheat and grain markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Joris. It was very insightful. Do you mind if we share your presentation notes with everyone after, or those who ask for it?
Publication, yeah, we use also other information from other sources. So yeah, but for information, for sure, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. If you can just stop sharing yours, then I will can move on to introduce Nick.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much, Joris.
Welcome.
Nick, would you like to load up your own slides, or would you like me to do that?
Hello, everybody. I can try to share my presentation if that's okay with you.
Yeah, it'll be easier. And in the meantime, I will introduce you.
Good.
So our next speaker is Nick Gordichuk. Nick is Managing Director of Agrico Ukraine, and he's the Vice President of the Ukrainian Potato Growers Association. Nick farms 600 hectares, around, I think that's 1,500 acres, on two separate farms. One is near Kiev, and the other is in Chernihiv. I hope I said that right.
Right.
He grows
Chernihiv, right.
Chernihiv.
Mhm.
He grows winter wheat, corn, and sunflowers, but most of his land is dedicated to the production of seed potato. Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting Melanie to speak to such a group of journalists and farmers. Also nice to see some familiar faces. The world is very
Nice.
small. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, you may just want to make it full screen though.
Try 1 second. For some reason I cannot.
I think you just have to click. I can't read the Ukrainian, so you just have to click play, or maybe double click on the slide to make it full screen. I don't know.
Because for me it is full. I can see a full screen now, but you cannot see full screen.
No, we see the application itself, and then the screen is
Right.
smaller. If there's a way to make it full screen so everyone can read the smaller type.
1 second. Trying to go back. 1 second. Can you see it now?
I can't. No, now we see just all the slides separately. But somewhere along the top taskbar, there's usually an option to press play, and that starts the whole presentation.
1 second.
Or it could be the top
Sure.
left here where those two arrows are. Do you see the arrows on the top left just above the first slide? I think it might be, if you click on the little arrow down, I think it might be there.
Yeah, 1 second.
And then how do you make that full screen?
Like this?
Hmm.
No?
No.
But do you see a slide by
But
slide or no? Or you see the whole slides?
we
Sorry
see,
about it.
someone says it.
Yeah, you can click on you have the percentage for just the how big your screen is, and then you have the icon next to it, and when you click on that, normally it starts at the bottom of your slides.
I mean,
Oh, yes, I see bottom right, you see 59%.
Yes, and then you have the first icon.
okay,
And then,
okay.
no, not on the percent click. You don't need to click on the percentage. You need to click on the icon next to
it.
the percentage, next to the line.
Oh, next.
No, the other
I
one.
mean,
Yeah.
on here, you mean?
This one.
But for some reason it doesn't work. I cannot start. For some reason it just doesn't.
It doesn't work.
Let's,
Okay.
let's try
Can
putting.
you just go with what like this? Can you see slide by slide?
Yeah, we can see
Sure.
it.
Okay. So today I was going to talk about potato industry in Ukraine in brief. Also my company, what we are doing, and also effects of war on potato growers in Ukraine, and of course about perspectives for developing potato market after our victory, after the war is over. I should mention that just like my colleagues already said, agriculture is very important in Ukraine. We have every fifth Ukrainian used to work in agriculture before the war started, and about 17% of our GDP, the income is coming from export of agriculture produce. So coming back to potatoes, Ukraine is number 5 in the world in potato production with over 1 million hectares. However, these all potatoes are grown in private gardens and by households. So professional growing in Ukraine of potatoes is only 65,000 hectares, which is area-wise is only 6.5% roughly. But when you speak about volumes, the average yield of potato growers is higher than average in the households. So volume-wise, we represent about 15% of the market. Speaking further about how is the market in Ukraine. So total production is about 19 to 21 million tons of potatoes, depends on the year. Consumption is very high comparing to other countries in Europe. On average, Ukrainians consume 120, 122 kilograms of potatoes per year per person. A lot of production of potatoes are in dacha or summer houses or private gardens. And the commercial production of potatoes is only 15%. And if you compare, for example, in Belgium or Netherlands, you see that many potatoes are being processed, sometimes 80, 85%. In Ukraine, only 150,000 tons of potatoes are being processed per year, approximately. And that has been before the war. Now it's even less because some crisps factories are closed. They're located in the war zone, like Lays, for example, located in Mykolaiv, and they were not able to reopen after the deoccupation. So total market in Ukraine, if you look at characteristics as it is now, it's considered to be a developing market. We have a lot of small producers who produce potatoes in also a lot of home production. We have limited storage for potatoes. That's why a lot of potatoes are being sold during the harvesting time. And that's why we also have quite big price fluctuations. On average, my colleagues like Tom can say that potatoes are profitable in Ukraine every 4 or 5 years, and that's when we call that. That's when many potato farmers make money. In most of other years, potatoes are a break-even crop, or it's more of a social crop for many farmers. If you look at distribution and sales, the sales are really scattered. Most of potatoes are sold over open markets, but also some, about 15 to 17%, are sold through supermarkets and retail chains. So speaking about, and it will change. Of course, we see that this picture will change, just like what we saw happen in Romania or Poland or Bulgaria. There will be a switch from open markets to retail and to supermarkets to organized channels. There will be more mechanized labor, and there will be more communication within the supply chain between farmers and supermarkets. What I do in Ukraine, I started my business as as an agent for a Dutch company, Agrico, in 2005, and I started importing seed potatoes. But in 2010, I started farming myself. It was due to the fact that imported potatoes were very expensive to farmers to afford, so we started local multiplication. And first I had a small farm in Kyiv area with 100 hectares, and later on I increased to 600 hectares into Chernihiv area where we grow seed potatoes. So on average, we grow 100 hectares of seed potatoes and 50 hectares of table potatoes. We are supplying potatoes to leading supermarkets in Kyiv, like Metro Cash and Carry, Auchan, Silpo, and also we work with Chips Lux, which is Mondelez, a group of companies, and we supply them a variety arsenal for chips. Just to give you an idea how our fields look, this is what it looked last year. In spite of the war, we were able to plant our potatoes. Unfortunately, our farm was occupied. We had Russians in our farm, and they've stolen some machinery. They've stolen some instruments, some tools. But we were lucky that our all people survived. There was not much problem with that. And also our tractors, they took tractors to their houses. So no tractors were damaged, just what was left in the farm. So we were able, when I returned to the farm, when area was deoccupied in 4th and 5th of April, first thing we had to do, and that's now we will speak a little bit about challenges that Ukrainian farmers had in Ukraine. First, we had to do is to demine or to take away mines from our territory. Because if you look, I'll just move further. So this is what our field looked of winter wheat when we came to the farm. And this is the road to the farm, the highway between Kyiv and Chernihiv looked when we came in spring to start the planting campaign. So first we had to take away mines. It took about 2 weeks. And then, of course, we were late with planting, and many farmers in our area planted quite late potatoes. We planted in May, and nevertheless, we were able to get good yields. We grow 50 hectares on drip irrigation and 100 hectares non-irrigated. We have very light soils. So on average, we have a yield of 41 tons per hectare. On irrigation, we get about 58 to 60 tons per hectare. That's speaking about our own farm and potatoes. The biggest challenges we had, besides taking mines away from the field, of course, the cost of input supplies like fertilizer, like crop protection chemicals, and diesel went up. Not to speak that in May there was almost no diesel available in Ukraine, because before the war, Ukraine depended 90% on Russia and Belarus on diesel and petrol. So all petrol and diesel was imported to Ukraine from Russia and Belarus. So in May, there was a big deficit. Of course, after we planted everything, there was another problem. It was the cost of logistics to bring the input supplies or to deliver. We grow seed potatoes, so we delivered a lot of seed potatoes to Cherkasy area, to Dnipro area, to Poltava area, and at that time we had to pay almost a triple price to deliver potatoes in April and May to our farmers, because first of all, it was risky to drive to areas which were bordering with occupied areas, but also cost of diesel doubled over a period of 2 months. So as I mentioned, main challenges were cost of input supplies, logistics, and of course, access to finance. It was easier for big companies or bigger enterprises to get money. Some of them already had open lines with foreign banks, but for small and medium farmers, it was very difficult to get financing during the spring. And many of them expected that they could sell their winter wheat or they could sell their sunflowers and pay the old debts. But unfortunately, as my colleague already mentioned before me, that the price of wheat has been very low. We were selling our wheat roughly at 105 euro per ton, just to be able to get some money in September, August, September. And sunflowers, we planted 100 hectares of sunflowers. Average yield was about 3 tons per hectare, and we had to sell it half the price which we sold it last year. So last year we were selling about 20,000 hryvnia, this year 12,000 hryvnia. So many farmers are suffering from the Russian aggression, and unfortunately, it's true that many farmers, at least 20-25% farmers, will not survive this year because they will not be able to pay their debts with the cash flow they get from their winter crops or from sunflowers. And it's true that I think it's even more than 30% of corn is still now non-harvested. If you look at Kyiv and Chernihiv area, I think it's even 50% of corn is still under the snow. So now in autumn, another challenge we have is electricity shortage. After Russian missile attacks, half of the country or 40% of the country had no electricity. So now, for example, in our farm, we are working on generator, and this allows us to pack potatoes and being able to supply 1 or 2 trucks per day to supermarkets. But many farmers are not as lucky as we are. They cannot either afford a generator, or they cannot find one that would fit their need in terms of capacity. So it's a big challenge. In general, it is a big challenge in general to do business in Ukraine during wartime. But nevertheless, to close, I want to say that we are all farmers. This war has united us, and we all are trying to help each other. And I'm sure there are many other humanitarian efforts from farmers in Ukraine and outside Ukraine. We were able to put together several lots of seed potatoes, and we delivered to households on the occupied territories in spring over 600 tons of seed potatoes, so they could plant and not to suffer from hunger in autumn. So that's part of what we've been doing besides our regular job. And of course, just to use this moment that I'm here with also speaking to journalists, I would like to mention again that there is a Russian aggression, and Russia is stealing land and stealing grain from Ukraine. I would like to thank you all also for support. And the war, unfortunately, is not over yet, and we do need you to support Ukraine. And as you see, there is a nice picture of one of our warriors was eating chips deluxe potatoes, while there is in the background there is a shooting towards Russian rockets. Anyway, thank you again for your attention, and also for possibility to speak at this webinar. And I hope for our victory soon, and we can regularly do our job as farmers, and not surviving, but really making this world better and feeding the people.
Yeah, thriving, not surviving.
Yep.
Nick, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. With your permission, will we be able to share your slides with those who request them?
Right. You can share. Yeah. Some of them are not mine, but the pictures are mine, so you can use them.
Okay, just the information I think people will want. And then just a reminder to please save your questions till the very end. If you're sending them in now, they're getting lost in the chat box, and I'll have to scroll through a lot of chat to try to find your questions. So just save them to the end, and we will address them then. So our next speaker is Hanna Lafreniak. Hanna is the Director General of the Association of Milk Producers in Ukraine. Hanna has held this post since 2016. Before that, she worked as a translator and interpreter for dairy farmers, traveling the world to visit dairy farmers at their locations. She is based in Uman, I hope I said that right, the agricultural capital of Ukraine. Thank you for being here today with us, Hanna. I think she might be muted still.
Just a second, I'm already with you.
Yeah,
Thank
there you are.
For the presentation and for the possibility to talk to everybody, and for such a high and warm attention of all the journalists to the topics connected with Ukraine and actually not only the problems of Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, but the testimony that such a small country actually turns out to be a very important link in the food security worldwide. That's why altogether today, I hope that we will be able to highlight on the necessary issues and challenging tasks that our farmers have to cope with. And together with you, we will be able not only to cope with all those challenges, but also to win. And taking the possibility, I am sharing the slides to start talking actually about the dairy farming and the consequences of the war. Just a second. I hope that now it's okay.
Yeah, it's perfect.
So a few words about Association of Milk Producers, first of all. This is the union, professional union of dairy farmers that was established in 2009. And before the war, we used to have more than 150 dairy farmers that are members of our association that together produced above 30% of all industrial dairy milk in Ukraine. Actually, AMP still is the main lobbyist of Ukrainian dairy farming and is the conductor of the best practices of sustainable, efficient production of milk to Ukraine. But with the beginning of the war, 22 members of our association turned out to be under occupation. Some of them still are. Nevertheless, northern part and eastern part of Ukraine have been partially deliberated. And about 40 dairy farmers that are members of our association are still in front line next to the hostilities zones. And that's why they are suffering a lot of challenges as well actually as all of other dairy farmers throughout Ukraine, because still there is no spot at our map that is safe enough to continue working. If you talk about agriculture as the industry, it used to be one of the leading industries of Ukraine and still is. Before the war, agriculture brought Ukraine about 10% of our GDP and brought above 40% of foreign currency income to our budget. We were and still are key exporters of a number of products, but unfortunately, as you can see from the list, barley, rapeseed, corn, wheat, oil, usually these were and still are the raw products. And that is what we need to change when we talk about the restarting and restoration of agriculture of Ukraine after the victory. What was the dairy farming of Ukraine before the war? Actually, there was a clear trend for decreasing of the cow herd in industrial dairy farms, but also in so-called backyard farms or households. You can see it from the slides. The light green bars show the tendencies for the backyard farms, and the blue bars show the tendencies for the industrial farming of Ukraine. But still, the milk supplies were not that dramatically decreased because those farmers, industrial farmers that survived and stayed in the industry, they were increasing their productivity and efficiency. And that's why within last 10 years, we had a very clear trend for consolidation of dairy farms. You can see it from the chart that shows you the grouping of farms by the number of cows. The only part of the farms that were increasing in their number were those that were holding above 1,000 cows. Actually, this is the same tendency for European Union and all over the world. It's because of economy. And at the same time, we had a very clear trend for the increase of the share and the role of industrial farming in the processing industry and the increasing of productivity of our farms. Analytical agency JIRA, together with World Bank and International Financial Corporation, were looking for several years for those spots at the world map for those countries that were favorable enough for the development of industrial dairy production. And actually, Ukraine was such a country, according to a lot of investigations, that could increase the volume of milk production to 20 million tons from 10 million tons that we used to have. But everything was changed by the war, and among all the other animal husbandry industries, dairy farming suffered the most, and a lot of damages, because 10 out of 24 regions of Ukraine that were affected by war used to produce and supply 42% of all industrial milk for processing. Dairy stats say that we have lost a lot of animals, and according to the official information, official statistics, about 10% of industrial dairy herd were lost. But as Association of Milk Producers, we have other figures, and we already see that these figures much bigger. It could be twice, about 22% of dairy cows of industrial sector were already lost. And optimistic prognosis are that we can lose about 70,000 cows, or 16–15% of our industrial cow herd. Pessimistically, it could be even bigger. But at the same time, thanks to those farmers that are situated in the central and western part of Ukraine, and their ability and strength to restart their business and to increase their productivity after first months of uncertainty and all the logistics broken, it helped us not to lose that much in the terms of milk produced. As of today, milk supplies to the processing have dropped by about 9% only, and our processing industry says that by the end of the year we will lose about 15 or probably 16% of milk that used to be supplied for processing, and this will be enough to supply dairy products for our domestic customers. First of all, because a lot of our citizens, mainly women and children that were main consumers of dairy products, are still abroad as they were made to flee. And at the same time, due to the activation of cattle farming in those contemporary safe regions. And actually, at the same time, our agricultural enterprises still are the objects for aimed shelling by Russian forces. They know what they are doing. They are setting panic, and they are destroying the leading industry of Ukraine. And that's what Russia's leave after their presence at our lands. These are crop farms in different regions of Ukraine. These are the results of aimed shelling at top dairy farms of Ukraine. Kharkiv region, Agromol that lost about 70% of their herd because of air raids and tank shelling. Agroservice, a farm in Kharkiv region that were also under high missile attack, and they lost a lot of their herd and of their machinery. These are the farms in Zaporizhia region, in Donetsk region, in Kyiv region, in Chernihiv region. Those farms that were situated in northern and central parts of Ukraine, Chernihiv, Sumy, or Kyiv region, and that were deliberated after a month of occupation, suffered a lot of damages. But those farmers that are situated in Kharkiv region or in Kherson region that were deliberated after 6–7 months of occupation, and still there are those farms that are under occupation, their losses are tremendous. But at the same time, our farmers continue working as volunteers, even those that are situated at risk regions, at front regions. They continue to be the main factor of survival of local citizens, local civilians, because they, those farmers and the farmers from all over Ukraine continue collecting, preparing, delivering foodstuffs for those people in need, for their army, ammunition for soldiers, and providing all those stuffs for free. But at the same time, we have to highlight the impact of the war that was made to the sector. First of all, a lot of speakers before me have already highlighted the role and the necessity of our seaports in the export and international trade. But not only for grains, it is important. Ukraine used to be among the leading exports of dairy products. especially to Asian and African countries. But due to the ports being blocked, those routes were impossible to use anymore, and we had to restart new logistics routes. Because of that, first month of the war within March, April, and even up to May, our processing plants had to work to their warehouses. They were making butter and powder milk mainly as storage products, commodities that could be stored for quite a long period of time. But thanks to the decision of European Commission to liberate or to loosen some of the conditions of international trade with European Union, Ukraine managed to start quite an active trade with European Union at the period of time when milk production in European countries dropped by 15–17% every month. And nevertheless, we have a war condition in Ukraine and quite tough times for our dairy producers and dairy farmers. We managed to increase the export of dairy products in money equivalent by 50% compared to the previous year. But at the same time, we could not use all the possibilities and all the benefits of such cooperation because of the war. And that's why we refer to our European partners and colleagues that it's quite a wise idea and quite a good step to support Ukrainian farmers. And this initiative with liberating the trade conditions when we have no quotas or no export taxes should be continued for next 5 or maybe even 10 years. At the same time, we have to highlight that animal husbandry together with agri sector as a whole have suffered quite tremendous losses. And according to the Kiev School of Economics and FAO organizations that were trying to calculate the amount of money that we have already lost, as of October 2022, agri sector of Ukraine have already lost 6.2 billion euros of their assets. It's about 23% of all agricultural assets of Ukraine. These are just direct losses due to the animals being killed, due to the premises being damaged or destroyed, due to the machineries that were destroyed or lost or looted by Russians. But also, if you talk about indirect losses, if you talk about in terms of income or profits that could not be received by our farmers, the losses are much bigger, more than 40 billion euros already. Several times our speakers already mentioned that we have quite a huge problem of the contamination of Ukrainian land with explosives, and that's quite an issue for our farmers, especially in the liberated regions, because due to that reason, as even those farmers that are deliberated cannot continue or complete their harvesting campaign. 30% of corn and wheat of Ukraine are still in the fields, not only because of the weather conditions and quite high prices for the drying of the corn, but also because the fields are mined so extensively that our farmers do not risk to send their combine harvesters or their tractors to the fields. And that's is the issue that we will need humanitarian aid, first of all, to make it possible for our farmers to start spring sowing campaign. At this moment, 30% of Ukrainian land is still contaminated with explosives. Also, the production cost has increased a lot due to the increased price of fertilizers, fuel, seeds. The cost of production of feeds has increased by 60–70% for dairy farmers compared to the previous year. Though prices for the milk, raw milk, have not dropped much in hryvnia equivalent, in our national currency equivalent, but still they are 35–40% lower than average price for milk in Europe. At the same time, the last terrorist attacks of Russia to our energy structure are causing quite challenging times for our farmers, because all the processes at the dairy farm are connected with the energy supply. Milking, feed production, and feed distribution to the animals, cooling of milk, preserving the milk and so on. Everything depends on the energy. And even 1 hour of delay in the time of schedule of milking costs our farmers quite big losses of milk that can be restarted only after a month or 2 or even more time of coming back to the previous schedule. What we see from the experience of our farmers in previously occupied territories, because of logistics being broken and impossibility to give the proper veterinarian and physical support service to the animals, an impossibility to bring feeds and veterinarian staff, and also impossibility to sell milk, our farmers were made to decrease their milk yields by 50%, even just to make the animals survive, not to destroy the animals. And most of such farmers, after a month of being occupied and such practices, after being deliberated, they spent 5 up to 7 months to restart the pre-war levels of milk productivity. The previous speaker, Nick Gordichuk, has already mentioned at his last slide the abbreviation SAVE-UA. It's a charity fund that was actually started by several agricultural associations, Association of Milk Producers, Ukrainian Agricultural Council, and also Association of Pig Producers, to help our farmers in affected regions to survive during active phase of the war. And Ukrainian Agricultural Ministry, Ministry of Agriculture and Agricultural Policy, have authorized those associations from the very first days of the war to gather donations and humanitarian supplies of critical inputs necessary for survival of our farmers. And actually, that's what we were doing and still are doing up to today. Thanks to such cooperation with our partners all over the world and also in Ukraine, and top producers of veterinarian medicine or milking hygiene and so on, we managed to supply those farmers in affected regions with a monthly or a quarterly supply of critical inputs necessary for their survival and necessary for preserving the good parameters of safety of milk that they produce. But still there are a lot of urgent needs necessary to meet for our farmers to be able to survive. And first of them is generators. Due to the continuous attacks of Russians to our energy system, about 50% of energy system of Ukraine is affected. And a lot of our farmers have to work on generators to generate electricity for their farms for 2, 3, 10, 12 hours a day. It increases the cost of production by 3 up to 6 times. And at the same time, there is quite a shortage of generators at the market of Ukraine, and shortage of possibility of working capital for our farmers to buy them. That's why we appeal to the world community and our European partners to help us to supply humanitarian aid in the form of generators to our farmers. Of course, we still need the help for humanitarian demining of fields in deliberated regions, for our farmers to be able to start the spring sowing campaign, and for them to be able to produce feedstuff for cows. We need to supply our farmers with the possibility to restart at least their pre-war numbers of cows that used to have, because not having such a possibility, they will not have the possibility to preserve jobs and to prevent the next wave of immigration of our people. We have to help them to stay at their communities. And of course, we also continue working on collecting donations and humanitarian supplies for our farmers, for them to be able to reconstruct or restart their facilities and destroyed equipment, and also to supply them with veterinarian medicine, with vaccines, with feedstuffs and hygiene products to be able to continue working and quickly restart after the victory. So at the moment, we already are talking with our Minister of Agriculture and with all our international partners, grant organizations about the new policy for agriculture of Ukraine and about the Marshall Plan for Ukraine and Ukrainian agriculture. We apply for you and appeal for you to help us, our farmers, to survive those tough times, for us to be really able to feed those 2 billion people worldwide, thanks to Ukrainian grain, and not only, but also for Ukrainian processed products. Thank you for your attention, and we'll be very glad to hear and see the questions.
Hannah, thank you so much for your time. It was a very interesting presentation. With your permission, am I able to share that with those who request it?
Of course, you're welcome.
Yeah, okay, great. I'm cognizant that we've gone over in time today, so I realize that some people will be leaving, but most of the speakers are still here to answer questions. Unfortunately, Tom had to leave, but he did leave his phone number and email in the chat box. So if you do have questions for Tom directly, you can contact him there. In the meantime, there are a couple of questions here. The first one comes from Luke Survey, and it's directed to Tom or Hannah. So Hannah, it's for you.
Okay.
How are companies active in both Russia and Ukraine positioned in this conflict, or Ukrainian companies active in Russia or vice versa?
Since 2014, when the first phase of this conflict started, and a lot of our territories were annexed by Russia, occupied by Russia, Ukrainian companies stopped cooperating with Russian Federation. But at the same time, a lot of international companies such as Syngenta, for example, Syngenta, or Bayer, or Kuhn, are still active in Russian Federation. At the same time, we see step by step the deliberate decision of a lot of companies, and we hope that this will be also a decision of such huge producers, as I have mentioned before, to stop cooperating with Russia as a terrorist country, to stop financing their war machine. And at the moment in Ukraine, our farmers become more and more conscious with those issues, and they deliberately also stop cooperating with such companies that are still active in Russia.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Tom or Nick, and since Tom's not here, it's for Nick. Nick, can you share a bit about the fertilizer supply? Have you found ways to get fertilizers, or do you run into a lot of the issues? And sorry, that question comes from Laura Verhelst.
Yep, thank you for your question. As a farmer, we have to deal with this question during the whole season regarding fertilizer. And usually by this time of the year, we usually buy most of our fertilizer for the next season, including nitrogen, potassium, and also ammonium sulfate, etc. At the moment, we just bought potassium, which was imported from Germany. Usually we buy cheap Belarus potassium, but now we buy it from Germany, and we had to wait for 1 month after payment before we received the fertilizer. So what we see now on Ukrainian market, there will be a lot of imported fertilizer from Turkey, from Europe, and of course the price is very high. So many farmers will already, our neighbors are talking about using very little fertilizer this season, and of course it will result in lower yields, not only in potatoes but also in other crops. We have some farmers are members of various associations like ourselves. We are a member of Ukrainian All Ukrainian Council, and there are possibilities also where there are bigger lots are being, or bigger pools are being imported to Ukraine, and then farmers could buy it at a lower prices. But still, at the moment, we are paying double of what we paid last year before the war started.
Thank you,
Okay.
Nick.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands, and I see nothing in the chat box at this moment. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, then please, I would like to ask Luc to give the final word and thank you to all of our speakers. And then I believe after that, he will provide a message in French and Dutch to the members of our guild. But thank you so much for your participation today to all of our speakers. It was really important that you were here.
Thank you.
Okay, so sorry. So we are already at the end of this webinar. I think really it has contributed to shed a new light on the current situation on the ground and on the prospect for the future of Ukraine. A huge thanks to all the speakers and in particular to our European friends, given the difficult work conditions they are facing. On behalf of our associations, I wanted to express our great empathy for the Ukrainian people and in particular to the actors of the agricultural world. So thanks you also to all of you for listening to us today. The presentation of the speakers will be sent to those who wish receive them. So tenslotte wil ik jullie ook nog meegeven dat de volgende activiteit van BVLJ-ABJA het nieuwjaars-event zal zijn. Na 2 jaar afwezigheid wegens COVID knoppen we terug aan bij de traditie dat we elkaar ontmoeten op de laatste vrijdag van januari. Het event gaat opnieuw door bij Jos Thijs in Olsbeek. Noteer dus alvast vrijdagavond 27 januari in jullie agenda. Donc, l'orateur sera Pekka Persone du COPA-COGECA et le thème de son intervention sera une analyse de la manière dont les différents pays de l'UE ont mis en place la prochaine programmation PAC dans un contexte de Green Deal et de crise ukrainienne, et à travers cela la question de la cohésion de l'agriculture européenne à travers ses différentes sensibilités. Donc d'ici là, passez d'excellents réveillons. Ik wens jullie prettige kerstdagen en een fijn eindjaar. Have an excellent New Year's Eve.
Okay. Thank you everyone for attending. I think that's it. Bye. Feel free to stay after if you want to catch up.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
I'm just taking down the email addresses of the people who want slides. Okay.
I want them to, Melanie.
Okay.
Griet@fields.be.
I know your email.
Dites personnellement, je pense que c'est une belle réussite. Je pense qu'on a atteint notre objectif avec des gens intéressants, des orateurs intéressants qui ont été concrets. Donc, je pense que c'est une belle réussite et tout le monde s'y est mis. C'est une belle collaboration aussi. Vous ne trouvez pas?
Oui, c'était franchement, c'était bien. Bien que j'ai cru qu'il y a pas mal de personnes qui sont parties à un certain moment. Mais bon, enfin, c'était... je crois que c'est une réussite. Finalement, j'étais assez fâchée parce que Clairinval avait envoyé quand j'ai reçu le mail de Clairinval, je veux dire que j'étais fâchée. J'étais à Strasbourg pour la session plénière et j'étais fort fâchée quand j'ai reçu ce mail, quoi. Parce que on s'y était pris très longtemps à l'avance, etc. Et puis on avait eu l'accord et enfin bon, voilà. Finalement, ça s'est bien passé.
Oui, oui, tout à fait. Je ne sais pas. Allez, I will ask it in English, Melanie. Do you have also a text of Yuri? Because he was speaking very quick.
I know. I think he had a lot. Oh, I'm going to stop recording. It's not